Welcome to The Debate. You know, when you look at the early blueprints for the Apollo space missions, there is this really absurd juxtaposition.
Oh, the engineering versus theory stuff?
Yeah, exactly. You have these sweeping, poetic, mathematical theories about reaching the stars, sitting right next to, like, scribbled notes about how to bolt together a tin can so it doesn't leak oxygen.
Right, it's incredibly profound and incredibly mundane all at once.
Yeah. And today, we are asking if a really beloved piece of television history suffers from that exact same juxtaposition. We are revisiting the first season of Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Specifically the 6th episode, Where No One Has Gone Before.
Right, and we are looking at it through two distinct lenses. First, the longtime fan comparing this early season quality against the show's later, legendary standards.
And second, adjusting the tone for a casual viewer experiencing these somewhat awkward early episodes today.
Exactly. So for my part, I represent the perspective that this episode is a brilliant narrative leap where the series first successfully proves its philosophical ambition and really earns its premise.
And I take the position that while the ambition is definitely there, the episode is ultimately a structural overreach. It's burdened by Season 1's awkwardness and, well, logical gaps the show just couldn't handle yet.
I mean, I think if you look past the visible strain of 1987 television production,
Which is considerable.
it is. But this episode succeeds brilliantly because it does something incredibly rare. It actually trusts its ideas without explaining them to death.
I don't know if I'd say it trusts them so much as it just throws them at the wall.
Well, look at the restrained handling of the Traveler. Here is this alien conceived purely as a philosophical concept, right? Someone who inhabits time and space the way a musician inhabits an instrument.
Right. That's the stated concept.
And alongside him, we get a surprisingly grounded, naturalistic portrayal of Wesley Crusher quietly observing him. For me, this is the exact moment the show proves it has the pieces to become what we love, transcending its stiff dialogue.
I understand why longtime fans hold it in that regard. I really do. But look, the execution absolutely fails the ambition here.
Fails it? Completely?
Yes. Because if you're a casual viewer listening right now and you load up this episode, the tonal whiplash is just impossible to ignore. You have moments of genuine tenderness sitting right next to the farcical inclusion of Kaczynski.
Oh, Kaczynski.
Right, this arrogant propulsion expert implementing complete nonsense math into a starship's engines. It's basically a cartoon.
I mean, that's a bit harsh.
But beyond the tonal clashes, the climax itself is deeply problematic. Asking the audience to believe a starship can move across billions of light years just because the crew concentrates their thoughts and really means it.
It's a leap, sure.
It is an unearned narrative leap. It's only the 6th episode of the series. They hadn't built the structural foundation required to ask that much of the viewer.
See, the clash between that stiff execution and the massive ambition is exactly where the heart of this episode beats, though.
Really? In the clash itself?
Yeah, because you have a production environment in Season 1 where, visually and textually, the show is struggling. The spandex uniforms look uncomfortable. The dialogue is incredibly formal, almost theatrical.
Very theatrical, very stage play.
Right, but then the ship jumps beyond the edge of the Milky Way, and then beyond the known universe entirely. And what strikes me is how the episode manages to make the viewer feel the terrifying size of the unknown.
Okay, but
And it does it through pure visual restraint.
wait, restraint? In a realm where stray thoughts instantly become physical reality? You're calling that restrained?
Exactly, because when the crew starts experiencing these thought manifestations at the edge of the universe, the episode doesn't go for massive, grandiose CGI set pieces.
Well, they didn't have the budget for that anyway.
True, but they leaned into it. It goes for glimpses of grief and memory bleeding through the bulkhead walls. It keeps it incredibly personal. They didn't try to show us the infinite universe. They showed us how the infinite reflected the crew's internal, suppressed lives.
I'll give you that.
That specificity is a masterclass in visual restraint.
I don't disagree that the concept of those manifestations is strong, but you cannot praise the restraint of the manifestations while ignoring the glaring plot holes and like awkward bureaucracy that drag all that ambition right back down to Earth.
You're going back to Kaczynski.
Look at the mechanical trigger for this entire journey, Kaczynski. We are introduced to this pompous Starfleet bureaucrat who takes credit for his translucent alien assistant's work.
Which is a very real workplace dynamic.
Sure, but let's look at what Kaczynski is actually doing. He claims he is running asymptotic equations to push the warp engines past their theoretical limits. But his engine modifications are, by his own admission later, essentially gibberish.
Right.
Are we really supposed to believe that this man has been successfully implementing complete nonsense math at Starfleet facilities for years without a single engineer noticing?
Oh, that absurdity is the point. It is a brilliant, pointed commentary on how institutions reward confidence over competence.
Oh, come on.
No! Think about it. Starfleet is supposed to be this utopian, post-scarcity meritocracy, and yet they fall for a fast-talking tech bro who uses big words and acts like he owns the room.
That is a fantastic, highly generous reading of the text.
Thank you.
But the execution on screen is slapstick. Even if we accept it as a subversion of Starfleet's utopian ideals, it is just so clumsily handled.
Slapstick is a strong word.
The scenes where Kaczynski is frantically attempting to fix the situation, literally mashing buttons on a console while his equations turn out to be meaningless, it feels like a cartoon.
Okay, I see.
You have this sweeping existential dread of being at the edge of the universe, and right in the middle of it is a bumbling fraud pounding on a keyboard. It completely undermines the sophisticated tone the episode wants.
I have to push back there, because Kaczynski is the necessary grounding element.
Grounding?
Yes! If you have an episode entirely composed of luminous aliens and abstract thought manifestations, it just floats away into pure fantasy. Kaczynski represents the rigid, arrogant, structural thinking of humanity.
I mean, I guess so.
He's the exact type of thinking that the realm beyond the universe forces the crew to abandon. He is the foil, and that exact failure of his rigid bureaucracy is the mechanical trigger that forces the show to rely on the only person operating outside that framework.
Which brings us to Wesley Crusher.
Right. We have to look at the portrayal of Wesley, especially how it compares to his overall arc. Up to this point in the season, Wesley was struggling under the weight of the genius teenager who sees things adults miss archetype.
Look, if you're a casual fan listening right now, you might be screaming at your device that Wesley is just incredibly annoying in this first season.
He has his moments.
And you aren't wrong. Which is why the burden this episode places on him is a massive overreach. The Traveler declares that Wesley operates at a level beyond human cognition, that like space, time, and thought are blurring into a single idea for him.
It's a big claim.
That is an enormous metaphysical crown to place on the head of a teenager. It sets up a chosen one narrative that the show will pursue with wildly varying degrees of success over the next few seasons. Mostly failure, let's be real.
I think that's debatable.
Does his portrayal improve or worsen over time? I'd argue this episode sets an impossible standard that later writers didn't know how to handle, eventually just writing him out of the show to go be a dimensional traveler.
But I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. The fact that later writers struggled with the character doesn't diminish what happens in these 45 minutes.
Fair enough.
I would actually argue this episode marks the single best Wesley scene of the early series, exactly because the payoff feels observed, not handed to him.
Which scene?
When we watch him hovering around engineering, we see him noticing what no one else does about the Traveler fading in and out of phase. And more importantly, look at Will Wheaton's performance in the scene with Riker.
When he goes to report what he's seeing?
Yes. When Wesley pulls Riker aside in engineering, he isn't performing his intelligence. He isn't a prodigy showing off.
Right, he's actually pretty nervous.
He's hesitant. He's stammering a bit, uncertain whether he'll even be believed. But he's unable to stay quiet because the truth matters to him. Wheaton plays it with such naturalism. It's just a kid desperately trying to be taken seriously by the adults in the room.
I will grant you that Wheaton's performance there is much more grounded than the scripts usually allowed him to be.
Exactly.
But the broader structural issue remains. The pacing is off. They drop a profound revelation about the next stage of human evolution onto a 15-year-old, and then essentially hit the pause button on that concept for years.
Well, television was episodic back then.
True. But let's look at the adults in the room. because this episode is crucial for understanding the evolution of the command structure, specifically Jean-Luc Picard and Will Riker, and how they shift from their stiff early-season personas toward their final, beloved characters.
Absolutely. Let's start with Picard. We move from the aggressively distant, almost combative captain of the pilot to something profoundly empathetic here.
Yeah, the contrast is huge.
And the turning point is that scene in the corridor. For the casual viewer who might not remember, Picard steps off the turbolift, the doors swoosh open, and standing in this sterile, gray 24th century corridor is an old woman pouring tea in a sunlit hallucination.
His mother.
It's his mother.
It is a striking visual contrast for sure.
And it is the most human moment the show had produced up to that point. Patrick Stewart doesn't play it as a massive, sweeping, dramatic revelation. He plays it almost entirely in silence. He portrays a man who is incredibly tired, very far from home, and for just a second, the woman who comforted him as a child is simply there. The camera barely lingers on it.
It's very quick.
Because the privacy of that moment is the whole point. We are seeing a vulnerability that was always there inside him, made visible only because the physical barriers of the universe have come down. It lays the absolute groundwork for the deeply empathetic Picard we see in later seasons.
Look, I come at it from a different way. I don't deny the quality of Stewart's acting for a second, but that quietness is actually jarring in the context of the rest of the episode.
Jarring? How?
I keep coming back to. You have this profound meditation on maternal love and human exhaustion in the corridor, and what happens simultaneously on the bridge.
Well, different people experience different things.
A crew member thinks about a Klingon battle targ, and a bizarre space pig just materializes next to the tactical console?
Reality was breaking down. The thought manifestations were highly subjective based on who is thinking them.
True, but look at the execution on screen. It's played entirely straight, almost for laughs. Nobody screams, nobody draws a phaser.
They were trained professionals.
Worf simply stares down at this hallucinated beast with an expression that suggests he is trying to figure out how to explain it in his shift report. It's situational comedy.
I thought it was charming.
But you are bouncing wildly between profound existential human vulnerability in the corridors and quirky sitcom gags on the bridge. The show doesn't know if it wants to be a profound exploration of the human condition or a workplace comedy set in space.
But human experience is exactly that mixture of profound vulnerability and absurd, quirky reality. Worf's deadpan stoicism in the face of a hallucinated space beast is perfectly in character.
I suppose.
And the reactions of the crew are vital for showing the evolution of the characters, particularly Riker. If Picard represents the rigid authority breaking down, Riker represents the necessary bridge.
That's a good point about Riker.
Right? When Wesley tries to explain the Kaczynski situation, Picard immediately dismisses him. It's Riker who stops, listens to the kid, and realizes the traditional engineering metrics don't apply anymore. Riker's evolution from a stiff, by-the-book first officer to the dynamic, intuitive leader we know later really begins right here. He advocates for Wesley when Picard won't.
That dynamic is definitely taking shape, and it forces Picard's hand by the end of the episode.
Exactly.
He has spent the previous 5 episodes actively forbidding Wesley from touching anything on his bridge, and then by the conclusion, he takes the Traveler's advice and names Wesley an acting ensign.
The trajectory of that mentorship, which, becomes a cornerstone of the entire franchise, is locked in right there.
It is locked in, yes, but it leads us directly to the climax of the episode, which brings all these threads together in a way that I find honestly, structurally indefensible.
Here we go.
We need to talk about the mechanics of the ending, what we might call the physics of belief.
The moment they return to known space.
Right. So the Enterprise is billions of light years from home. The Traveler's strength is failing. His physical presence is literally dissolving into the subspace energy around him.
It's a great visual.
And Kaczynski has made things worse. So Wesley realizes that in this specific realm, human belief is the only engine that matters.
Yep.
He gets the crew to concentrate their thoughts, to direct their positive cognitive energy toward the Traveler, and that collective focus physically propels the ship home.
It is a beautiful thematic resolution.
That is a deus ex machina fueled by good vibes.
Oh, that's incredibly cynical.
You cannot establish the rules of a highly complex realm beyond the known universe and then immediately use those newly invented rules to save the ship 5 minutes later. It demands far too much of the audience.
Does it, though?
Yes, if you are a casual viewer tuning in, you're basically being asked to accept that a 4.5 million metric ton starship can be moved across the universe simply by having the crew close their eyes and really mean it.
That's reducing it a bit.
It might work on a purely emotional level, but logically it is a glaring overreach. It's a rough first draft of an idea about the power of consciousness that the show wouldn't learn to properly articulate until years later.
See, you are treating this like an engineering problem, and the entire point of the episode is that engineering has fundamentally failed.
But it's a science fiction show.
Right, but the bolts have fallen off the tin can. Science fiction earns its keep right here by explaining how this universe functions. The Traveler isn't magic.
He's basically magic.
No. Think of the Enterprise like a massive sailboat that has suddenly sailed off the edge of the map and run completely out of wind.
Okay.
The physical propulsion systems are useless. What the Traveler does is act as a biological lens, a subspace antenna. He teaches the crew how to row the boat using the water of their own consciousness.
Row the boat with consciousness?
He takes their cognitive energy, focuses it through his own alien physiology, and translates it into a warp bubble.
Look, that is a gorgeous analogy. Seriously, the sailboat metaphor is fantastic.
Thank you.
But my problem is that the nuance of that explanation isn't fully on the screen. We get fragments of it, but mostly we get people squinting really hard at a console. A thesis statement is only as good as the structural foundation supporting it.
They were laying the foundation by showing us how the warp bubble interacts with cognitive energy at the edge of the universe. The show is stating exactly what it came here to do.
Which is what?
It wants to explore what it means to be conscious in a universe larger than human cognition can contain. When the ship clears the edge of the known and keeps going, the only thing waiting on the other side is everything you have ever thought, feared, or loved, made terrifyingly real.
It's definitely a bold idea.
And the show doesn't blink. It sits in that terrifying reality. This is the exact moment the series stops being a standard nautical exploration show with phasers and diplomacy and becomes a deeply speculative philosophical exercise. The climax isn't an overreach. It is the series declaring its identity.
I agree that the ultimate destination of the series, the sophisticated exploration of thought and existence, is a noble identity. But the mechanics of the journey matter. The rushed resolutions, the reliance on Kaczynski's farcical incompetence to get them there, the sudden, underexplained pivot to the power of collective wishing.
Collective wishing.
It keeps the episode firmly anchored in season 1's growing pains. It shows us exactly what the series wants to be, but proves it doesn't quite know how to get there yet.
Well, we're coming to the end of our time today, so let's sort of synthesize where we stand. I maintain that where no one has gone before is the definitive narrative leap for the series.
Right.
It successfully proved that its philosophical ambitions could anchor the show, completely overriding the stiff execution of its early days. The restraint shown with The Traveler, Patrick Stewart's quiet brilliance in The Corridor, and the earnestness of Wesley's discovery make it a masterpiece of early sci-fi television.
And I maintain that while it is an undeniably crucial first draft of the show's identity, the execution simply cannot be ignored.
The leaking plumbing.
Exactly. The clumsy mechanics, the extreme tonal whiplash between deep grief and bridge comedy, and the climax that relies a bit too heavily on the physics of belief make it an unearned overreach. The ambition is staggering, but the plumbing is still leaking.
But I think we can find common ground here.
Oh, for sure.
Regardless of its mechanical flaws, we both agree this episode is a pivotal artifact. For longtime fans looking back, it is arguably the first time the massive promise of the opening narration was truly earned.
It really was.
It paved the entire way for the deeply sophisticated explorations of consciousness in the seasons that followed.
I will certainly agree with that. There is immense value in looking back at the rough beginnings of beloved characters. Seeing Picard and Riker before they fully figured out who they were to better understand their final destinations.
Yeah.
The growing pains are just an essential part of the legacy.
Thank you all for joining us for this discussion. We encourage everyone listening to keep exploring the material yourselves. Go back, watch the early attempts, and see what you find.
See if the magic works for you.
Because in the end, looking back at those early scribbled blueprints, you still have to marvel. The bolts were clumsy, the plumbing was crude, and the math was nearly impossible to execute. But despite all of that, the ship still managed to reach the stars.